Today, COVID-19 stimulus talks drag on in Washington, and deep divisions between lawmakers remain. Plus, Nintendo posts jaw-dropping profits, thanks to all of us who are still addicted to Animal Crossing. And finally, Senator Bernie Sanders takes on the billionaires and how much money they've made during the COVID pandemic. I'm MacKenzie Sigalos, and this is CNBC After Hours. Let's start with a quick look at how Wall Street finished the day. Stocks moved higher, with all three major indices posting daily wins. And for the NASDAQ Composite, another day brings yet another record close. Also on record watch, the S&P 500. It closed about 1% away from its all-time high back in February, which was before the big pandemic sell-off. Now, after the closing bell today, Uber reported quarterly earnings, and there are two big numbers you should know. The first is 29. Revenues declined 29% from the same quarter in 2019 as the company saw steep losses in its ride-hailing business. But then there's that other number, 2. Uber Eats delivery bookings doubled this past quarter as the company shifted focus from ride-hailing to food delivery during the coronavirus. Now, one more stock to hit here, but not an American one. I'm talking about Nintendo. The Japanese company trades on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, but we have to talk about it. Nintendo's profits are soaring. I'm talking growth of 400+%. Video games are a winner of the stay-at-home economy, especially Nintendo's Animal Crossing. Take a look.
People are flocking to video games in droves. Amid the coronavirus pandemic, millions around the world are spending more time inside as they work from home, learn from home, and socialize from home. And video game makers are cashing in. Nintendo profits surged a whopping 428% last quarter. The company, which is based in Japan, made $1.4 billion or 144 billion yen between April and June of this year. For context, in the same 3 months of 2019, Nintendo made just 27.4 billion yen. The boom comes on the back of the March release of the runaway stay-at-home success Animal Crossing New Horizons, the latest version of its long-running bright and cheery cartoon game that tasks players with building villages on their own islands.
It's weird to think someone lucked out in the pandemic, but Nintendo had Animal Crossing, which was their huge smash hit during this whole thing, and arguably it couldn't have been better timed because the whole game is about being outside, and everyone was desperate for that. So you have this game that normally would sell, a few million copies, selling orders of magnitude more than that. Just ties into this very relatable vibe of like, hey, I want to have like a quasi-vacation.
He's right. People love this game. Nintendo has sold more than 22 million copies at $60 a pop. Back in April, our own tech editor admitted he was addicted.
Oh my God. I've already played it for 55 hours. So I don't know what that measures out to per day, but several hours a day. My routine has basically been, instead of commuting to work every day, I'll wake up, shower, make some coffee, and then catch up on Animal Crossing, do some chores in the early parts of the morning before I have to hop on and start doing work on my computer from home. And then as soon as work is over, it's time to relax and jump right back into Animal Crossing. That's kind of been my life for the last 2 or 3 weeks.
He says he's not playing as much now these days, but other people certainly are. US video game sales surged 26% in June to $1.2 billion, according to research firm NPD. And Nintendo isn't the only winner. Big publishers Take-Two Interactive and Activision Blizzard reported impressive earnings this week. Activision's revenue jumped 71% from the same time last year, and Take-Two raised its sales forecast for the full year thanks to strong demand for games like Grand Theft Auto and NBA 2K. The big question, though, is what happens to these gamers once the pandemic ends?
So I think part of that will carry forward because these people, bought the hardware. A lot of people bought a Switch or a PS4 for the first time, and they have this thing in their house now. So these are new potential consumers that didn't exist before.
Okay, let's get to our sound check. Here's a roundup of the day's biggest action and what the top newsmakers and business leaders had to say on CNBC's airwaves.
I think we should not continue the process of paying some people more not to work than to work. I do think we need to adjust whatever unemployment compensation bonus there is to reflect that it's not fair for your neighbor to stay home and make more and you go back to work and make less. It is a drag on the economy.
Can we give a huge chunk of money to the people who are disenfranchised, to minorities who want so badly to stay in business and can't, and to people who are trying to go to college or have student loans who are minorities, who are the most affected because they had the least chance in our country? That's got to be something both sides can agree to.
Perhaps you mistook them for somebody who gives a damn for what you just described. That's the problem.
This month, we're going to close 100,000 mortgages across 50 states. So we know that tech platform is there. We know how powerful it is. And we'll just continue to demonstrate that to the market, line it up with our incredible digital-first brand. And I'm very, very confident that over time, you're going to see the entire market recognize the power behind Rocket companies.
What we're seeing is in this real-time data, a marked plateauing or leveling off of the data in the last couple of weeks of July and into this first week of August. So, our guess is that even if tomorrow's number looks okay, numbers coming forward are not going to be that great.
Earlier this morning, we got jobless claims data from last week. Now, jobless claims are just finance speak for the number of first-time unemployment claims. Last week, about 1.1 million people filed for unemployment for the first time. That's actually the lowest weekly amount since the pandemic shut down much of daily life in the U.S. But it's still the 20th straight week that more than 1 million Americans made initial claims. This data reinforces what we already know. Things may be looking up, but there is still a massive portion of the population who are out of work. And about 30 million Americans who were receiving boosted unemployment benefits from the federal government aren't getting those anymore. All the while, a lot of rich people got richer. Many billionaires saw their net worth increase over the course of the pandemic, and Senator Bernie Sanders says the government deserves a piece of those gains in the form of a wealth tax. CNBC's Robert Frank can explain.
So Bernie Sanders is proposing to tax the gains by billionaires during the pandemic. And the reason he wants to do this is because those gains have been enormous. If you look at the bottom of the stock market in mid-March versus the top, which has been really early August, the top billionaires in America have gained over $630 billion in wealth. So Jeff Bezos gaining $47 billion, Mark Zuckerberg $38 billion, Elon Musk $17 billion. So what Sanders is saying, look, it's unfair when so many Americans are suffering for billionaires to do so well. So he's proposing a tax on 60% of the gains during this period. Now that would raise around $300 billion, which is only about a tenth of the federal deficit. But as he puts it, when so many of our people are hurting, it is morally obscene for billionaires to use a global pandemic as an opportunity to make outrageous profits. Now, the other side of the argument, of course, many of these tech companies have just soared, but a lot of billionaires aren't. If you look at the year, if you look at some of the casino companies, some of the real estate billionaires, they have actually declined. And so if you look at over a longer term, it's been a really mixed year for billionaires. And that's the problem with taxing wealth or any kind of capital gain, is you can pick a period where they've done well and say, well, that would raise a lot of money. But then when times are bad or they lose, does the government give that money back? How do you deal with losses? How do you deal with if you've already given them money for a $47 billion gain, if you lose $30 billion of that, if Amazon stock goes down? And so from a practical point of view, taxing wealth gains that are driven by the stock market is a very volatile game.
Okay, time for today's numbers round. We'll kick it off with $3 billion. Jeff Bezos sold roughly $3 billion worth of Amazon shares, according to SEC filings. Now, those documents show that these sales were actually part of a prearranged trading plan. Earlier this year, Bezos sold about $4 billion worth of his Amazon shares, bringing his 2020 cash out total to about $7.2 billion. He still owns more than 54 million shares in Amazon, currently worth more than $170 billion, securing his spot as the richest person in the world. Next is 200. Pools are a hot commodity in 2020. One pool component supplier in Indiana says that orders for pool walls surged 200% in just 60 days. A sales director at a different pool supplier in the state says he 100% attributed the surge in demand to the coronavirus quarantines. And it's not just the U.S. Sales of easy-to-build pools from one distributor in Spain also surged more than 200% in the first 6 months of the year. They're currently out of stock. And finally, $25 billion. President Trump agrees with a proposal from Congress to give another round of bailout money, another $25 billion to the still struggling airline industry. The first round of relief kept employees on the airline's payroll through September 30th. But collectively, airlines have warned 76,000 employees that come October, they will be laid off or furloughed as the industry adjusts to new, much lower levels of consumer demand. This next $25 billion would extend that payroll support beyond September. That's it for After Hours, but before we go, here's one more thing to keep an eye on. We'll get the July jobs report tomorrow morning, and economists are expecting it to be ugly. COVID cases surged last month, and some regions reclosed businesses that had opened earlier in the spring. Get those numbers the same time we do by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. We'll be right here in our home office every Tuesday, Thursday, and now we'll also be with you on Friday with a new weekly roundup edition of After Hours, so be sure to catch us then.